I think we should start, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So welcome everybody to this AIDA AI Excellence Lecture. So today there should have been Nico Sebe to chair this session, but he couldn't make it for some unforeseen family issues. So you're stuck with me. I'm Paolo Rota from the same university. I'm University of Trento. And today we are here for the lecture of Professor Gül Varol from École de Pont, Paris Tech. And just a few things about the speaker. She did a PhD at INRIA, the École Normale Supérieure, supervised by Ivan Laptiev and Cordelia Schmid. Then she did a postdoc in Oxford at VGG together with Andrew Zisserman. And now she is associate professor at École de Pont in Paris. So she's been working on many different topics in computer vision in general. She's been also very active in the community. She did a chair in many major conferences. She also was program chair at the last ECCV. Well, without further ado, I will leave the floor to Gül for her lecture. The title is Text-Driven 3D Human Motion Synthesis.
Thank you, Paolo. Well, that was already a complete introduction, as I'm from Paris, École de Pont Paris Tech, and happy to summarize some of our works in the past 4 years, I would say, on human motion synthesis. So just a disclaimer, I will show a lot of videos, and some of them, depending on my and your internet quality, might not come through the same as on my screen. So everything I will show, you can also find most of the materials online from my webpage. So bear with me on that. And a quick introduction of the team I'm part of is called Imagine in Paris, and it's a relatively big, like 30-35 people team centered around 5, 6, 7 permanent researchers. So we all look for PhDs and internships usually every year. So keep an eye on if you're interested. And yeah, so just wanted to introduce my background also in terms of a bit of the different things I'm doing before I dive into one of them. So I do a lot of vision and language, where vision is either generic video or sign language video, movie, and also in the specific case of today's talk, human motion, so 3D human motion. So I wanted to give example for each of these different tasks I'm looking at. For example, text-to-video retrieval, we want to have this capability of searching videos with not just a text, but an image and text. Let's say you have this plant, you don't know the name, and you want to find a particular video of it while somebody's pruning. You type the text, but you also add the image query. So that's something we've worked on recently. And something I've quite a investment in the last 5 years on is sign language videos specifically. So it's a video to text, in this case, a transcription sign by sign. We're trying to translate each sign into English, for example. You have like a complex signing one after the other. And in the movie description, we do a bit like captioning, again, video in, text out, but in the context of a story. For example, here you have Snape points at Harry as the prediction, and there's references to characters, and also not just like describing the color of someone's jacket, so which would be in generic captioning, but things that are the relationship of the characters and the change in the scene that are relevant to the movie. So that's the goal. And yeah, so today what I will talk about is this last line of work on human motion generation. Again, there's text involved, and this time text is input. So we have text, put hands on the waist, move torso left, and we want to generate synthesize 3D motion data. So I want to motivate a little bit, and this is one of the videos which might not be super good quality from internet, but imagine, if you cannot see, that this is like a very complex scene of a Spider-Man movie where the motions are complex, maybe not realistic all the time. You see like this acceleration and this jumping, maybe it's not even physically correct. And we want to generate such scenes. And like now in the studios, like the pipelines of real movie production, there are a combination of techniques. For example, here is a man with a suit, motion capture suit with these like squares on the body and multiple cameras. It's a synthetic scene with a blue background. And then once they capture this acrobat, which is maybe not which is more skilled than the actor, they map the motion to the real appearance of the actor. And other techniques they can do is like some of the motions, maybe even difficult to capture in that scene, and they can capture it in this motion capture studio alone and then stitch things together in rendering engines, like in some virtual environments. And some of them are even not even possible to capture in real life. And this one, like, it will be dead. Yeah, so then you can completely go to synthetic manual animation by clicking and generating those things. So all this to show you that it's in the movies, but it can be like it's for humans in this case. It could be for any characters. All this to show that making such assets for motions is cumbersome and expensive. And yeah, it has applications in video games, more and more in augmented or virtual reality, anywhere where human motions are present. And yeah, so this is also to show you an idea of, give you an idea of another motion capture studio in Max Planck Institute, where there's a capture team, data team, and constantly capturing new data. And it's an expensive setup that not everybody can afford. And the question we're asking here is whether we can generate motions. Well, then we would like go around this problem of collecting and the main, like the more like specifically the question we're asking is whether we can control the generation with natural language. And I'm sure you all know that text-to-image generation models now are performing quite surprisingly well. Like you would have like a family eating sandwiches and you generate an image which is really realistic there. And it's the same thing there we want to do for text to motion. A person is walking forward and then we want to generate the motion. The difference here is, of course, the data, and compared to image and text pairs, we don't have such large amounts of data. So some of our works will be trying to address that. In this screen, I want to like first give a preview of, I don't know, 3, 6, 7 things I'll briefly mention today, and both like only in terms of input-output relationships first, and then I will dive in a bit more in the details of those. So the first one is action condition synthesis. So you're given an action, like pickup, and you want to generate this few second avatar motion. And here, when we say pickup, it's actually like, let's say you have 40 action categories, it's action number 6, like it's an index. It's not a text that the model sees, it's the action category. And in the follow-up work, we have looked at free-form text, where you go beyond these action categories. You can type in many words, like a human walking in a circle clockwise, and you generate a motion like this one. Then in the next two, it's more about compositionality, a bit more fine-grained than going beyond a single thing. So for example, when we say temporal compositionality, we mean sequences of actions one after the other. So in this case, you have hold golf club, swing golf club, jog forward, and kneel down, all one after the other. And here we like concentrate on the smoothness and the transitions between motions. And the one after is a spatial compositionality. Here it's about simultaneous action. So you can do the first example I showed earlier, two things at the same time, put hands on the waist and move torso right. And here the question is really about the data. How do you get such things? People usually don't annotate more than one thing per motion. Otherwise, the techniques are similar for a single text to motion model. And in the following, we have a bit more general framework combining the last two, which is multi-track timeline. So you have this timeline, a bit like in audio, where you can have multiple things happening in parallel. So here it's walking forward until this moment, raising with hands. At this moment, starts jumping, drops the hands back and stops. So it gives you a bit more fine-grained control. Animators might find this a bit more intuitive and having more control, but also it simplifies the text rather than saying walk forward for 3 seconds and then in the middle of the walk start raising hand. Oh, but in the middle of raising hand. So even in language, things get very complicated if you wanted to put this whole thing into one sentence. And again, like getting the training data for this is impossible. And the last, well, at the bottom we have motion retrieval, where it's slightly different because we're not looking at generation this time. We're looking at retrieval. So you're searching based on text, a bit like YouTube. You do human walks up the stairs as a text query, and you rank your existing motions according to their similarity. So here we are talking about existing motions where we have a database, but we don't have text associated to them, and we rank them. In this case, walks fast. So this is a demo you can also play with, but I'll show how these works in a second. And the last one we have looked at editing. So say you have retrieved or generated a motion, but it's not exactly what you had in mind. Could you modify it a little bit? In this case, you have the red motion, which is kicking, but we want it to be kicking higher. So you generate the green one, which is kicking higher. So that's the idea. Again, data problem, who gives you the triplets to train for this? So we have a way to automatically, well, semi-automatically collect such data. All right. So all these were published in the past few years at different venues, and they have associated web pages and code and all that. So I'll go through each of these in sufficient detail, but not much. Which all builds on top of each other. So for the first one, which has the foundation of all this, is called actor, based on action category. So you have categories, you pick one, and you generate. We've seen this before. And the data for this one is relatively easier than the others because we have lots of video action recognition data sets with sufficiently simple backgrounds with annotated actions like this one. And what we do is we estimate human motions. Back then, this was Vibe 2000, I don't remember, 19 methods. So now methods are getting much better. And then we can transfer the label and get ourselves a motion action pair, even if these motions are really noisy. I don't know if you can see on your screen, but on mine, this one on the right looks quite noisy. Okay. I want to have like a little parenthesis here for those who are not familiar. This is meant to be a lecture. But assuming that, yeah, so many of you, if you're familiar, it's quite brief. We're basing at the time most of our methods on variation autoencoders, which is one family of like methods to do generative modeling. And the idea is that it has this encoder function and a decoder function with a bottleneck Z, the latent space in the middle, where as in regular autoencoder, you would have a reconstruction loss. So you're trying to reconstruct X itself with X prime. So you put a loss in between the two, but also a distribution loss, a KL loss in this case for making the distribution of latent vectors come from a normal distribution so that at test time, you can sample from this Gaussian and random vector and decode, only use the decoder. So you don't use the encoder anymore. So the encoder learns to compress samples at this low dimensional representation, which is supposed to be like a fixed size vector representing the input, right? So we'll use that idea for motions. So we'll have an entire motion, like say 100 frames for 4-second motion, for example, I'm just making it up. compress into a single vector, and that single vector will use that at one decoder shot, so it's not frame by frame, to generate the entire motion at once. And when we are talking about action conditioned or any type of conditioning, we're talking about conditional variational encoders, where the label gets input both to the encoder and decoder side. And this is what we do in Actor. So that was like to introduce this diagram, which is relatively complicated. But what you can think of is the left side being the encoder, left side the encoder, right side the decoder. And in the middle, I don't have my mouse, unfortunately, to walk you through, but in the middle you have the Z, which comes from, well, it's a fixed size vector latent representation of a motion, which you see P1, PT, series of poses. So in this case, we are using a simple SMPL body model that is like the angles between the joints of the body in the kinematic tree. So it's a parametric representation. And given those, we use a transformer like typical like a multi-layer attention architecture. And except that instead of like, so to be able to encode the whole motion sequence into a single embedding, a single representation, that can be compatible with the variational encoder definition, we have these learnable tokens mu and sigma on the left that is depending on the action. So for each action, we have another mu and sigma embedding that we learn. And we take the corresponding outputs as the mean and the variation. So the parameters of the normal distribution correspond to that particular motion. So we do the reparameterization trick and standard VAE to obtain the Z. So this is during training. We have, again, a learnable bias. Think of it as each action having its own translation in the space and another Gaussian in the space, depending on the action. So then, given the single vector and a series of positional embeddings, so 1 to t, so you say, I want this many second motion, then you give that many positional encodings at the input of the decoder, and the decoder generates the P1 to PT head, the sequence all in one shot, so there's no iterative decoding. At the end, there is the standard reconstruction loss on the output, but I'll not go into the detail, but we put, because the simple is a differentiable function that takes in these rotations between angles, the joints, and given those can generate the vertices, the vertex locations, the XYZ coordinates of each of the mesh points. Then we can also do extra loss on Euclidean loss between those points, but that adds some regularization. But there's a KL loss and a bottleneck, which is standard. Okay, so yeah, all this to say, the left side is like an encoder where you have the real motion and the action condition as input, and at the decoder side, you have again the action again, the condition again, and the bottleneck. At test time, you discard the encoder. So it's the same as VAE. For those who are not familiar with this simple model I've been talking about, so this we can show the meshes because it's a parametric model that takes in pose and shape. So pose encodes the articulation, so this rotations between joints in their kinematic tree. And shape is some identity specific, like how tall, how fat a person is, for example, learned over some distribution. But in this work, we are primarily interested in the articulation, so we discard the shape parameter, we set it to like average person, and we are using the pose parameters. And given those, you can obtain the vertices and joints also. Okay, so let's look at some qualitative results for this data set where you have categories like pickup, high knees running, punching, and knee lifting. So you don't have the hands. It's a model that doesn't capture the hands in this case. Left stretching. And if you run multiple samples, like for side kick, you have left or right leg with the kick. Hands can be at different locations because they're irrelevant. So this is exactly what we wanted to capture, so the diversity. And comparison to the state of the art back then, which was only one work, action to motion has this also VAE-based method, but frame by frame decoding. It tends to jitter. I don't know if you can see on your screen. It's very noisy, whereas ours was super smooth without having any complicated method. In terms of results, yeah, so we have this action recognition accuracy as a metric among other metrics, but on these two data sets, NTU and Human Act, we saw that it was also following what we observed visually, that we had like 97% accuracy, whereas they had 94. And for that, you train an action recognition network on their real data, and then you apply it on your generated data. So it's not ideal setting because of the domain gap between generated and real anyways, but gives us an interpretable metric. And the nice thing is, yeah, you can control how long you want to generate. And if you try like the same vector with multiple durations for the pickup action, you see that they all bend down at the same time and get up at different, get up a bit slower when you give more frames. So it's not just some linear scaling of the speed. And another nice experiment I really like is this generating, the train and test time gap. So on the left, you see a model that is trained always on 60 frames. So it's fixed duration at training. And then at test time, we see the x-axis at testing at different durations. And look at just the blue curve, the accuracy. It maximizes if it matches the training duration, so that makes sense. And on the right, we have a model that is fine-tuned further with variable durations. So you sample between 60 and 100 frames of motion. And there it becomes more robust to things that are longer, but things that are shorter, because you don't have enough evidence of what action is to recognize it, it drops quickly. And one last thing about this work is that because it's a VAE, I mean, which tends to generate smooth things, we know that. But what we did is we took a real motion. Remember, it comes from video-based estimates that are jittery and noisy. And we encode it through our model and decode it back. And then we visualize it, which is on the right. I don't know, again, if it's the same as in your screen, but the left one is really noisy and the right one is really smooth. So that was kind of a side product, which we did not intend to, but it was kind of nice to see. Well, I've already showed you like the spoiler at the beginning, but how to go beyond predefined action categories is by going through free-form text. And that's what we did in the next one, except that there were already a few works doing that, but they were all like mainly deterministic. So given a human walking in a circle clockwise, they would only generate one. And what we wanted to do is to generate multiple, even if like, they all capture the same thing, but based on the ambiguity of language, a circle can mean a small circle, a big circle. If we don't mention the speed, it can be fast or slow. So all the diversity, which is not mentioned, the degrees of freedom of the language, we want to generate those variations. And the method-wise, it's similar, well, still a bit different because of this text encoding part. It's not a real VAE anymore. But on the left side, you have this idea that comes from a previous paper, it's called Language to Pose, of having two encoders, motion and text, and one decoder. So that's not from us, but the idea is that you have two paths. So you can do motion to motion VAE or text to motions. And during training and at test time, you remove the motion part branch. And that helps the model a little bit. And architecture-wise, it's exactly the same as in Actor. So you have a transformer, you have the mu and sigma tokens, but now they are not depending on the action. So that's the main difference. They are text is encoded separately from a pre-trained language encoder, such as Distilbert in this case, but we also learn a few layers on top. And you have multiple losses this time instead of a single KL, like a single distribution loss in the bottleneck. You have one for the motion, one for the text. And also we want to make those two cross-model spaces similar. So we do ZM motion vector minus ZT, the text vector, to be close to each other. And the decoder is similar. So you give positional encodings and you learn. Yes, it's similar to Actor, but it uses a pre-trained language model. And it allows us, the VAE part, the sigma and mu and sigma, they allow us to do multiple generations at test time. You can sample from that Gaussian. And here we have fully supervised motion capture data where people annotated them with text. So for example, a standard one back then was KIT. It comes with about 4,000 motions annotated with about 6,000 text. And the text looks like this, like human walks straight, human walks a circle, turns left. So typically one thing and per motion. And now there are more data sets, human ML3D, Babel, which we use in the subsequent works. And back then, if you compare this ground truth example, person walks 2 steps, turn around, and another 2 steps. The very first work on this was not even following the text, and even the language to pose that we built on was not always following either. Gosh et al., this is the one before us, was relatively good, but there was this food contact loss that was a bit exaggerated. And yeah, overall, we found ours to be better. And now we're at this point, we started using user studies to compare, saying which one is better, left or right. So it was significantly better in our case. So not showing those. And in terms of diversity, you have this jump forward, and then you sample 3 different latent vectors at 1, 2, 3. And you can see, let me play it again, that the distance, how much they jump, the amplitude is different for each of them a little bit. But again, this variation is limited by the variation in the database. So it's not, I think, beyond 3 or 5, you start to get the same motions over and over again, or not detectable by human eye as differences anymore. Well, again, spoiler already given, but if you want to go beyond the single text, single action, what can we do? We want to have this temporal compositionality. We talked about motions one after the other. And there, yeah, we introduced teach, which is for temporal compositionality. We want to have infinite sequences, infinitely many emotions. And before, when I showed Temos or Actor, these transformer-based models, the positional encodings, there's a limit how much you can do at one iteration. So this is going to be something in between. Here's an example of wave, kick, catch, throw, lunges, stand, sit down, turn left, and sit. So it's like a demo. It's not from some data set. We can just type those things one after the other, and it will do. And how does it work? So remember Temos, the one with the motion and text encoder on the left and right, so same as before. We just changed the text encoder to be, so I'll just play this again, to be aware of the past. So we instead, besides the distilled bird on the right, we add the past, a few frames from the past motion. So what it does is it can generate, given a single text, so imagine independently generated for each motion, you can generate a motion, but for the first one, and the second one, when we generate it, we not only give the text for the second one, but also the last few frames of the previous motion, so that it learns to start from where we left before. So that's to improve the smoothness. And in this case, all you need is pairs of the labels one after the other. You don't need this 5, 10 one after the other. So to be able to train such model, you need pairs of labels, and we get that from Babel, so cited at the bottom, which has this kind of annotations, a bit more shorter, but yeah, segmenting the entire motion into small parts. And yeah, the results similar to the one I showed before. Another one is wave left hand, raise right hand, step to the right, walk in a circle, sit down, stand up, hop over obstacle. Well, room for improvement on the quality, but the following the text, the fidelity is quite nice. And now that we have done the temporal compositionality, the next thing we did was looking at spatial. So can we do input multiple text at the same time? So then in this case, the order doesn't matter. It's a set of descriptions. Before it was an ordered sequence. And we introduced sync. You get the idea that I can generate, like, put hands on the waist with 3 different compositionality with moving torso left, forwards, or right. But how can we do that? The traditional animation pipeline, what people do is they have such interface where they say they want to combine the waving hands from the top with the sitting of the bottom, and they want to generate something that stitches the two together. What they can do is they click on the limbs. So they want the left arm, right arm. I don't know if you can see inside the yellow box from the first motion. And then they select the legs from the bottom motion, and then they put it together. Right? So for simultaneous actions, you need to really like make sure that the same body part, well, the body parts are compatible and they do what they're responsible for. And here, what we've done is to automate it by getting that information from GPT. So we've observed that you can ask things like, what parts of the body are moving when someone is doing the action? Squat down, and then it will reply, the legs are moving when someone's doing the action, squat down. Well, in practice, we have a prompt which is a little bit more structured to be able to parse it easier and give it a list of body parts and so on. But this kind of approach, so say you have what are the body parts involved in the action X, so that X you replace with all the motions in your database, all the text in your database. And we give also a few examples like to describe the task, and that helps. We also give a list of body parts. So in this case, we split it by 6. So further for granularity, we started seeing like muscle names, tibia, and things were getting a bit difficult to map back to the parts we know from simple. But yeah, I think future work can look at this a bit more. So in this case, we are splitting the body into 6 and asking a language model to find which parts are relevant to a given action. So in this case, raise arms, look at the arms, stroll, look at the legs, and then what we can do is we composite them just like the animators would do manually. But we don't stop there. So this is a way for us to get training data. So this could be it's our also baseline. So this could be a method on its own. You can independently generate motions and then stitch them together this way. But what we do is we take our training motions and stitch them together, like the real motions, by using GPT-3 to create synthetically data that comes with 2 labels or more. But yeah, usually 2 is the limit of what a person can do. And the method is the same as Temos. So we have the same motion encoder, text encoder, branch, and a single motion decoder, except that the data, the text data, well, there's synthetic data in training, but the text, when we have 2 motions, two text, we randomly pick one of the versions, how they can be combined together. So you can say while, during, simultaneously, and then at the same time. And there are different ways to phrase it. So to put 2 things at the same time. And then at test time, we can select pairs. So we have some very little data to give you an idea, like 3,000 motions with 2 labels out of 30,000 motions with single label or something like this. And a test set even less. So we can, yeah, we observe that if you have a combination at your training, then you also do better at that test. But if you have unseen combinations, then there's no way you can do that. It usually does one or the other. And here we're testing on pairs that we have not seen at training under the real, but we might have seen them during synthetic. The synthetic we do on the fly generation, so we don't like control the set. Here is like move left leg in circles and spin arms backwards. It's pretty nice. Sit down, drink with right hand. Answer phone with left hand and sit down. Kneel down on right knee and tie shoelace. Okay, we can do 3 things at the same time: kick, extend arm, look left, and so on. But you get the idea. So far I have talked about 4 types of inputs, which were like all specifically doing only that. And the next one I want to show this multi-track general framework where we can have things like walking in a circle clockwise. You start walking and at this moment you wave the right hand. Now you jump, walk backwards. Upload is the one that never works. Turn 180-degree, raise both hands, sitting down. All right, so this is a bit more general case than all this specific spatial or specific temporal compositionality work. And the approach is also a little different. So we take this time a diffusion model, but we don't train with such data. We can do this only at test time using a model trained with a single text and a single motion. And just do like a quick parenthesis here. For the diffusion model, this is the where you're trying to learn the reverse denoising process. So trying to denoise a given noise to recover realistic data. And we have models trained on MDM, motion diffusion model, trained on single text, condition on that text, and denoise some until you get the realistic motion that follows that text. And we use those, except that let's say we have 3 text inputs. So we have 3 initially independent denoising process. And then at each denoising iteration, we communicate between those 3 by doing some arithmetic. So this idea that comes from diff collage cited at the bottom. And it's kind of an average between the overlapping segments when there's a temporal transition. And when it's, we know from the previous work sync that we can get from GPT the body part assignment. So if we know that this motion only cares about that body part, we slice it from that motion. So it's like a lot of Lego, like patching, like summing things up for multiple channels. And then because we do that over and over again, like over 100 iterations of denoising steps, over time they communicate and they know what each others are generating. So it's not really independent anymore at those locations. So we have some qualitative results, which I've shown before. So I'll skip that quickly in the interest of time. Okay, I can't skip this. Raise arms. Okay, so for the the quantitative experiments, we did some human study, perceptual study, showing people things like that combine 3 actions to keep the cognitive loads small, but in practice we can do as many tracks or as many motions. So right, so we've talked about retrieving, right? So if I don't want to generate motions for any reason, I want super realistic, physically correct, or I want to find what is in my database. I have a giant database, I don't know how to index. I can retrieve, so like search using text. And this is what we do. Someone is walking in a circle clockwise and you want to rank your gallery of motions. So there's no generation here. And for those familiar with CLIP or any of those contrastive learning, multimodal representations, that combine multiple modalities. So here we have text and motion, and whereas in CLIP you would have text and image. And we do standard contrastive loss, which would make a similarity matrix between the text embeddings and motion embeddings, and make the diagonal, maximize the diagonal and minimize the off diagonals, right? So that's the main idea. So it's as simple as that, except that we are here doing something a little bit more specific to these motion databases. And one is the model can find shortcuts. If you do only contrastive training, it doesn't have to pay attention to all the text, but by also jointly doing retrieval and synthesis. So we keep the motion decoder. So it's very similar to TEMOS, right? So you have the text encoder, motion encoder, and the motion decoder. We keep the same architecture, like, the Z, and the latent vector is the same. So we can still do motion decoding and put an extra loss on the generation so that we kind of make sure the model pays attention to encoding all the words. That's one advantage. And the other thing is because in this human motion descriptions, a lot of things are similar. So you could say in 2 and 3, right? So a man walks in a quarter circle to the left, human making a counterclockwise turn, they actually correspond to same thing. So we don't know if they are really negative. So, and this appears a lot in our data. So what we do is we take them out from the equation of the loss, and we filter them out and see like it helps a few more percent. Yeah, so in terms of results, the rank at 1 on the kit, the same data set we used before for generation, we see TMR, which is the latest version, like the final version, compared to just the contrastive loss. So adding the synthesis helps with 5% here. And just the synthesis loss without contrastive was actually TEMOS, which we were already doing before. So there we get also 6%. Some results for walking up the stairs. As you can see, the text that corresponds to them, they are not necessarily the same, but we don't use those texts for search. So another example is person winds up his arm and then pitches a ball. There's lots of those in the database, pitching a ball. We can bring them all in the ranking. One nice side product of this was to do moment retrieval. So say you have this long motion and you want to find the moment it does a backflip. So now it colors up where it's the maximum similarity between the word backflip, the text backflip, and the motion. So we can plot this one-dimensional signal where we do sliding window similarity and locate the maximum location. So here's for pivoting body 180 degrees. It's a very subtle movement. And here it happens. And we have a way to evaluate for this also because Babel comes with these small segment annotations over motion. You can imagine doing counting or just like even longer sequences. So we have recently improved this method by making it a little bit more robust to domain gaps. So we've observed that all these datasets, HumanML3D, KitML, Babel, they actually come from same source of motions. It's just different people annotating in parallel different works. So it's really some domain gap in the text. And we have seen that if you train on one and test on the other, you completely fail. And we've done some data augmentation, text paraphrasing and stuff, which improved quite a bit and allowed us to do zero-shot retrieval as well. And there you have text like Babel, where you have punch, a single verb. And in HumanML3D, it's very verbose. A person stumbles on the ground and keeps on running. So you can do both ways, shorten it or expand it. So we've done this with some LLMs, and you can check more in the paper. And the nice thing there was to show that you can train zero-shot on HumanML3D and test on action categories of Babel, which are super precise. And with or without augmentation, it jumps quite a bit. Okay, in this last bit, I want to show something relatively recent on editing. So this idea of not having exactly what you have in mind and you want to modify a bit more. So you have this red motion and you want to, given the text, generate a new motion. So there are two conditions this time. We have seen this at the beginning. And there are ways with the existing approaches that can do masking a part of the body part and then giving a text. So that would be text condition model repurposed into editing by manually selecting the parts that needs to be edited by masking them. So these are kind of our baselines. There are also some rule-based methods that take in like that are very specific for certain types of edits, like some keyframes and body angles. Yeah, so it's there is some LLM in the loop, but it needs to follow certain rules. It's quite complex. So instead, what we do is we collect data for this. So we collect data in the form of triplets, source, edit, and target. And how do you get that? Well, we have already this TMR, text-to-motion retrieval model I just presented. We can use that to not only do the text-to-motion retrieval, but we can use that to do motion-to-motion retrieval to find pairs of motions that are very similar to each other. So the ones on the left, they're all doing some kind of jumping jack. The ones on the right, they're all doing some kinds of throwing. They're not exactly the same, but they're similar. So that allows us to mine pairs that are similar. And then we make Amazon Mechanical Turkers type the distance, well, the difference, describing the difference. They can skip if it's too similar or too different to describe, but we have sufficiently many, like 6,700 motions pairs, like motion pairs together with their edit text. That is, yeah, is already like bigger than KIT, which is sufficiently big for training a model. That's the data set we call motion fix, and you see that the word cloud of the things that in the edit text appearing things like instead, right, left, hand, arm, so referring to body parts and making references to the source. So instead of doing that, do this. Okay, so the data set looks like this, throw at a higher angle. The green one is the target. Reach higher with arms. So these are all examples with higher. Put your hand higher on the head. It's quite subtle on this one. So another example, don't bend down from the back, instead bend sideways left to right. It's a bit more complicated than just higher or lower. Do the throw faster and catch from higher. Hopefully it looks good on your screen. Do one more repetition and extend arms and legs wider apart. All right, so the data you can explore yourself by going to Motion Fix the page. And in terms of the methods, we have a again transformer-based diffusion model. So building on text-to-motion diffusion models, we have, instead of just text, we have also source motion as a condition. So two conditioned diffusion model. And qualitatively, so our generations are in blue, and the green is the ground truth for turn back sooner while crawling. So that's correct. If you overlay green and blue, they're not exactly the same, but it follows the text. So here's another example. Don't move the right up, right hand, left and right. All right. So before I conclude, I wanted to say that I've shown works from our group, but there are many works also a few key people here that you might want to check their cool works on relevant things. And yeah, so there are many open questions, a lot of room for research for many people, especially on the data side. We are still in a couple of thousand motions here, and scaling for a better generalization is definitely needed. And all these motions were happening in isolation, and human motions usually interact with objects, other people, floor, scenes, and this is again a data question, but yeah, also method-wise, different approaches. Similar to all generative models, how to evaluate is a typical question. And going back to my initial question of, yeah, can we generate motions with words? Like there are things that are not describable with words, especially in the editing part. It gets really tricky to say, okay, like bend your elbow at like 5 degrees, or like the humans, sometimes it's just easier maybe to click. So there could be different forms of editing control. With that, I can, well, I'd like to thank first the students, Mathis, Nikos, Leor, and colleague Michael, and can take any questions.
Thank you, Gül, for your interesting talk. I think those open questions can be also inspiring for somebody who followed you today. I think we have already a question in the chat. So Antita asked,
I'll
why
stop
was,
share so I can see the chat.
right, yeah. Or I can read it, as you like.
Yeah.
Can you see it?
I guess that's not a question, the first one. Okay.
No, then
Okay.
then
The slides and okay. Why was there the jittering in the generated skeleton in the results of the competition, and how did you avoid it? Given the time, I'm assuming this was about the action.
one of the first works, yes.
Yeah.
I think the first one.
Yeah, we have also observed it when we were doing like frame by frame generation. It tends to jitter because it's independent. I mean, it's not really independent. It still sees the previous frame, but yeah, for some reason that was like the main issue. And whereas you have a single vector that generates the whole thing, it will smooth it out. It was magic. I don't know. A good answer. But we had a transformer version. So that was VAE based on recurrent neural networks also. So there's quite a bit of difference. We've tried to do apple-to-apple comparison with autoregressive transformer versus non-autoregressive that we've designed. And there it was also, yeah, jitter was happening, but also like it was not following the action category as well. Even encoding the existing motion, like real motion, and decoding it back, it would not generate the same thing again. So it would say like waving, and then it would encode and decode to waving with the other hand. So there were really drifting issues with the frame by frame.
Yeah, but maybe just your model was just better in smoothing it out, right?
Yeah, I suspect it's for the VAE. That's the trick.
There's another question.
Emos, how are mu, sigma, and beta B token obtained for the action label? So this is an actor, it's not in Temos. So they are learned. So they are learnable embeddings. So think of it as I don't know if I can share again. Yeah, so they are learned. It's a lookup table of learnable. Yeah, exactly. Any other questions? Comments?
Maybe I can ask one. Just,
Yeah.
I was curious, how do you tune the time for each action in Teach? You know, action compositionality. I
Yeah,
mean, you
it's a
can
very
have
good
different.
question.
What? Okay.
It's a good question because we still haven't investigated that further, but there was this problem of some actions favored certain durations, right? So especially with walking, I remember we had issues with cyclic motion. Yeah, so we looked at like distribution of the training set and checked that if we go maybe too far from that, the model doesn't like it. But in Teach, the data set itself on average is like 1-2 seconds per motion. So at like if the typical standard evaluation of using the actual data training and test set, it was fine. But as a demo, if you go test yourself with longer, it was starting to fail. Whereas in Actor, we didn't have that issue. I think with text, we didn't have enough data per motion per text. We don't see the same text over and over again. In actions, you had hundreds of motions for the same category. And here it's both compositional, like it could be multiple words, and you don't see the same text over and over again. It has more tendency to overfit and stick to the same duration it has in a training, I guess.
Okay. Any other question from the audience?
That was good timing.
Yeah. So maybe another one just to conclude. So how do those models generalize to unseen action. You show something, right?
Yes. Yeah, so
Very
with
very simple, like the movement of
yeah,
the
it doesn't
hips.
really, I mean, so nowadays you can always, I mean, one idea is to use, even if it hasn't seen that text, you can use an LLM to paraphrase it in your vocabulary. So there are people doing that, but yeah, I kind of skipped some of the failure case examples where we have playing piano as a text, but then it plays the violin. Like it has seen the word play with the violin, so why would it play the piano? It's never seen. But then, so yeah, if it has never seen piano, why would it generate emotion? Unless if you one nice thing would be to detect that it has never seen, it's out of distribution, and then translate it in the words that the model understands. With like LLM can say that put your arms in front with 90-degree and move your fingers. I mean, that's it. Yeah.
So this is still an open,
It is open, yeah.
an open problem. Yeah, there's another, I think, question here.
There's plenty of room for research, and the impression that many of these contributions are iterative, so it's bound to be hard to keep track. What about the computing power? It's really, I mean, given that there's no image or video, it's really relatively cheap. I mean, we have models that train on a single GPU for 9 hours when it comes to diffusion, but much less for VAE models. So I would say I mean, I give this even in my master's class as a project for like term project for 1 month with some Google Cloud credits. So it's, I think, really accessible in terms of compute.
Okay, I think oh, on the gong.
What do you think about application of explain text-to-motion model for sign language tasks? Is there any effort on this? Yeah, we do have efforts on this, not published, but yeah, so there the main question is how to use data with hand articulation. And recently we've gathered some, and people have, I think, 2, 3 other papers I've seen, they've started looking at estimating motion from video and using that. So text, not in the sense of free-form text translation, but which doesn't work. I mean, there are people looking at that, but more like a single sign. So it's more like action to motion. Very good question. These models are open source, yes. All of the code is online from my webpage. They're linked. All right.
Okay, are we good? I guess so. So yeah. So thank you again for your lecture,
Well, thank you.
and I think we can conclude your talk now.
Well, more data and more scenes, environments, not just some floating people.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you again,
Thank
and let's see with the next lecture. I think I don't know when will be. I don't have the plan here, but yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Well,
Goodbye, everybody.
bye.
Bye bye.